So today is Transfiguration Sunday. It's the Sunday right before Lent begins. It's a time for us to think really hard about who Jesus is. And once again, we're jumping around in Matthew. I told my husband last night, I'm not really a fan of year A in the lectionary so far because we keep jumping around in the Gospel of Matthew. We start in the beginning, then we go to the middle, then we go back. So let me give you what happens just before our lesson for today in Matthew 17. We have Matthew 16. And in Matthew 16, verse 19, Peter inherits the keys of the kingdom. And then in verse 23, that is right, verse 23, just a few short verses later, Jesus says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan," because Peter messes up, as sometimes he's prone to do. And then in verses 27 and 28, Jesus pronounces that a judgment will be coming, and quickly. Jesus is giving his first prediction of his own death in the gospel. And so just after that lovely thought, Jesus takes Peter, James, and James's brother John and leads them up a high mountain. And he is transfigured, and his face shines like the sun. Now, I don't know if it does for us so much, but I have a good feeling that for the people who heard this at this time, it would have reminded them very much of when Moses went up on a mountain and got to see God's backside, because God's face was too much for any human to see. And then Moses shone, right? Moses came down and his face was all bright and shiny. He had had this experience. And so now this happens, and Jesus is the one who is all shiny and bright. And Peter and the others are so excited. They say, "Oh, can we build a place? This is so great. Can we build a place for you?" Because who shows up? Elijah and Moses. Which might seem odd, but Moses, while we know that Moses died, Moses' death is written about. They don't know where Moses is buried. Tradition has it that God buried Moses somewhere. And so nobody knew where Moses was buried. And then you might remember about Elijah. He didn't really die. He was swept up in a chariot of fire. And here these three are gathered talking. Why? Why in the world does Matthew tell us this story? Well, for one, there are some people saying that Jesus must be Moses or Elijah. Come back. Jesus is them. He's returned as one of them. And so in this meeting, in their coming, the disciples present see that Jesus is Jesus. He is not Moses. He is not Elijah. He is Jesus. And then the really interesting thing to remember happens at the end of our reading, where Jesus says, "Tell no one about this amazing thing that just happened, that you were so excited about, that you wanted to build a place for all of us. Tell no one about it until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Now, there are a lot of places in the Bible where Jesus does this, and it happens several times in Matthew, where he says, "Don't tell anyone." Don't tell anyone. But here, I think it's important to note that he says, don't tell anyone until after the Son of Man has been raised, until after the resurrection. Because I want people to understand what just happened with the resurrection in mind. It's very important. It's very important to Jesus. So what do we do with this? What do we do with this whole thing, this transfiguration in light of Lent coming up? We have all heard the story of Jesus' resurrection. It happened just last year. It will happen again this year. So what do we do with it now as we are beginning Lent? I think it's very important for us as we interpret this to understand what came just before it. We hear Peter inheriting the keys of the kingdom. Jesus says, Peter, here, the keys of the kingdom are yours. And then just 4 verses later, we hear Jesus say to Peter, get behind me, Satan. We have those right there in contrast with each other, butting heads together. And yet it's a really good example of our humanity. And Jesus does not shy away from that. Jesus does not say, Peter, get your act together so that you can have all these things happen. When Jesus told Peter, Satan, get behind me, he didn't say, and I will take those keys back from you now. Please return them. Jesus was in the midst of both things, that tension that we might call saint and sinner, that we all live in every day. Jesus is right there in the midst. And he didn't prevent Peter from coming up the mountain either. He didn't say, whoa, Peter, you kind of messed up there back there. I'm going to take somebody else up with me. Nope. He took Peter right up there with him. Because Jesus has always met people where they are and still meets us exactly where we are today and invites us to meet other people exactly where they are. It gets really easy to be judgy. It gets really easy to see things that are going on, maybe on a grand scale of a national level, or even within our families, and to get really judgy. And I think that's why we have Transfiguration right before Lent. Jesus is Jesus. Always has been, always will be, the Son of Man, as Matthew calls him. God's Son, who was resurrected from the dead for us, who shines so brightly that we can't help to have a change, a feeling come over us. Now, if you are a Facebook friend of mine, you might have seen that I asked people for some examples of mountaintop experiences that they have had. And what kind of made me giggle a little bit is most of them actually involved mountains. The people that responded to me, many of their experiences involved mountains. And some of them were really profound, having this experience of the divine on a mountaintop, finding a little makeshift altar, and being able to pray up there, feeling close to God. Or some people had this experience where they didn't know how they made it through something they made it through. My uncle sent me an email. He's not ever on Facebook, so somebody else must have told him about it. He emailed me, and he said, I remember when I was moving to North Carolina, I was riding on my motorcycle, and I got caught in snow down south. And he happened to stop at a rest stop as soon as he could and met a soldier who was going to Fort Bragg, I think he said. And they found a ride from some kind soul who threw their motorcycles, they're both on motorcycles, in the back of their trucks and took them on to where they needed to go. They made it, and he said, that is my mountaintop experience because I don't know how that all worked out, but it did. We have to come down from the mountain. Have you had a mountaintop experience before where you feel elated and close to God and amazing? And you want everyone to understand it and feel it just like you do? And you come down from the mountaintop and you're so excited, and then you run back into everyday life where other people didn't experience the mountaintop you experienced. And it doesn't mean they don't care, but they're bound to not have as much excitement about it. A good friend of mine, and I told her I wouldn't reveal who she was. She gave me such a great mountaintop story for our gospel and our lesson today. She and a friend went to walk the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And they were walking, they planned to walk 20 miles. And these miles seemed to get longer and longer for them. And they were very far from villages and indoor plumbing. And they were at the top of a mountain, and nature called. And they were having such a hard time because they had to figure that out, away from actual bathrooms. And they said, or she said, that it was such an experience to do that on a mountaintop. It sounds insane, but it really mixes the divine and the human together, something that's so normal that all of us understand. We all understand being human. We all have, I hope, experienced the divine. God is with us in the midst of both of them. Jesus came and experienced life as both human and divine. We are not expected to be somebody we're not. For God and Jesus to love and care for us. So feel today that bright light of Jesus that's just shining bright. Continue to feel it as we go through Lent. But reminding ourselves how wonderful it is, what a gift it is that God loves us just as we are, our imperfect selves. And remind us when we're dealing with others that God loves them just as they are. And sends us out to spread that love around. And tells us, I do not leave you alone. You're going to come up here in a little bit and share in communion. The Lord's Supper. Jesus' body and blood in us. Jesus touches the disciples in our lesson. This is how he touches us still. It says, get up. I am with you. Get going. Amen.